It looks nice.
It is very cool.
It does look nice. We need to get the right books there.
Cool books.
All right, so we'll start in a minute. We'll get the recording going. And so, well, I know we have friends trickling in for us today, but I want to respect our time here. So good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. We have friends joining from multiple continents, multiple time zones today. I counted, at least on the list of registrations, my guess was about 20, possibly 20 countries are joining us here in addition to our panelists. So I'm very excited about that. And I feel especially for our friend Anne, who's coming all the way from, she's in Melbourne now, but right at present, but it's close to around 11 o'clock at night there for her. So, so we are happy to have people in all sorts of time zones here. My name is Kevin Ahern, and I'm happy to welcome you all to this panel exploring the legacy of Dorothy Day outside of the United States. And so the program is being sponsored by Manhattan College, especially our Peace and Justice Studies program and Campus University Social Action programs here that have a series of programs related to Dorothy Day. An international lay movement, series of lay movements of Catholic professionals called Pax Romana, ICMICA, and the Guild for the Canonization of Dorothy Day, which I am connected to as well. We selected this day today, May 15th, because it is the day of the, excuse me, it's the day of the feast day, as you will, of the death of Peter Morin, who most of you probably are aware is someone very close to Dorothy Day's legacy. So it's rather fitting in this month of May, which is a special month for the Catholic worker, to also celebrate it on this day. And so we remember in prayer today, Peter Morin. We also remember and we will remember Dorothy Day's granddaughter, Martha Hennessy, who is also a member of the Guild, who will be released from her prison witness in the next few days. So we hope that transition goes well. We hope to have a second part of this session in the next few months, possibly in September, linked to have more voices of Dorothy Day's legacy outside of the North American context, and to look to bring in some voices more from Latin America and Africa, regions of the world where we did not have space or time to find voices here for this panel. And so this panel brings together an intergenerational, an intercontinental, and an ecumenical group of activists who have been inspired by this journalist, activist, and possibly a future saint in the Catholic tradition. So we are excited to have this conversation today and to hear how her legacy is impacting the world and the church beyond her hometown of New York. And so before we begin, though, I want to turn the floor over to Colleen Dooley from America Media, who will lead us in prayer. Colleen is also a member of the advisory board for the Guild. So Colleen, can you lead us in prayer?
Sure. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Loving God, you have gathered us from every corner of the world to reflect on the life and lessons of your servant, Dorothy Day. Give us a spirit of passion like hers, a passion for justice, a fire in our heart that drives us to serve our brothers and sisters without counting the cost, a fire that continues to burn even when our work is difficult and we are worn out. Give us a love of peace and a commitment to nonviolence like Dorothy's. Give us the faith we need to believe that this world's injustices will not be solved with war, but with peacemaking. Give us your spirit that we might be the peacemakers you call us to be. Give us the grace to hear that spirit speaking into our conflict-ridden world. And give us reflective hearts like Dorothy's, that in the middle of the chaos of each day, our hearts may be places where your word dwells and echoes within us. May we come back to you often in prayer, even when we can only steal away for a moment. Let us always draw our strength from your deep wells of love. We ask all this through the intercession of your Dorothy Day and her co-laborer, Peter Morin, whose death we remember today, trusting that you will hear our prayer. Amen.
Beautiful prayer, Colleen. Thank you. Before we get to our panel, it's really my pleasure to turn the floor to George Horton, who's the vice postulator for the cause for Dorothy Day's canonization and works with Catholic Charities in New York and coordinates the Guild, which is one of the sponsors here. So George will give a quick update on where we are in the process, maybe some exciting, interesting developments happening, and that will help to set the stage for our panel in a minute. Thank you, George. You're muted, George. George, you're muted.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm getting used to the Zoom now after a year. Thank you, Kevin. I'll repeat what you said. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night to some of the people who have joined us for this wonderful discussion of Dorothy Day and the global church. Let me first say a word of thanks to Kevin Ahern for putting this webinar together. And as Kevin has mentioned, he and Colleen are faithful members of our Dorothy Day Advisory Committee. Thanks also to Manhattan College and Pax Romana, who with the Dorothy Day Guild are sponsoring this event today. And of course, deep gratitude for our global panelists from the Netherlands, Philippines, Australia, and France. We look forward to hearing of your commitment and the perspectives you will bring to the life and legacy of Dorothy Day and the Catholic worker movement. We imagine and hope for a time when Dorothy's Memorial Day will be on the universal calendar of the church. My deepest thanks. Quickly on the canonization process, let me say at the outset that many people believe that Dorothy is already a saint to be emulated. The canonization process follows as the official church inquiry and affirmation of that deeply held belief. The good news: there are two phases to the canonization process. What is called the local diocesan phase, where the case for her canonization is prepared and evidence of her sanctity gathered. And the Roman phase, where that case is reviewed by the Congregation for Saints in Rome, and then a recommendation made to the Pope. The good news is that we expect that the local diocesan inquiry will be completed this year by the anniversary of her death, November 29. I'd like to make 3 comments on the process. First, the immensity of the task. Often we've wished that Dorothy hadn't written quite so much and that so much had not been written about her. Her diaries and letters alone, which all were handwritten and in the archives of Marquette University, constituted 32 square feet of boxes, which had to be unpacked, digitized, transcribed, and then carefully reviewed by officials of the inquiry. Many of you may know that New York City recently commissioned a Staten Island ferry boat, and we have jokingly thought we could use this huge passenger vessel to transport all the documents as precious cargo to Rome. We also would be going with the cargo to Rome as well. I'm happy to say that the essential work of gathering and finishing the work on the letters and diaries has now been completed and custom arranged to Vatican specifications. I have to say a word of thanks to Phil Runkle of Marquette University, Jeff Corrigan of our staff, and Dr. Joe Sclafani of the Ignatian Volunteer Corps for their assiduous work on these letters and diaries. The work of the Historical Commission and Theological Censors is nearing completion, as is the gathering of all eyewitness and expert testimony. So we're almost there, and we expect to finish this year. Let me say something about our intentionality of keeping costs low. One of the early concerns expressed was the cost of the canonization process, and that money could be better spent helping people who are poor. From the beginning, we have been intentional in keeping costs low. We did not have the resources of a religious order or large donor base in Dorothy's constituency, as you can imagine. We've had great support from the Archdiocese of New York, members of the Guild, and small grassroots donors have been our sources of support. In addition to the voluntary support of Archdiocesan cause officials, our Historical Commission, Theological Censors, Catholic Charities, and Guild members, we have done this by engaging over 100 volunteers and the Ignatian Volunteer Corps in the work of the letters and diaries. Many of these volunteers who transcribe the written letters and diaries report a transformative experience encountering Dorothy Day through this work. 100 people took all these letters and diaries, the written, and transcribed them for us. However, we continue to need your support, and I ask if you think you can help, please go to the DorothyDayGuild.org website, and you can find ways to help. There also is an opportunity there for you to share any graces and favors you may have received with Dorothy's help. And there's an archive of the Dorothy Day newsletter. Finally, I have to say a word about the extraordinary cadre of people who have been involved in this process. From the initial meetings with the Catholic workers and Cardinal O'Connor in the late 90s, with people who knew her and supported her canonization, including Adi Batoon, Eileen Egan, Frank Donovan, to the establishment of this advisory committee to guide the process, including Tom, Monica, and Deirdre Cornell, Kathleen and Pat Jordan, Robert Ellsberg, Louise Wick, and Martha Hennessy. The support of Monsignor Greg Mustachulo, a vice postulator, has been invaluable. One of the great gifts has been the involvement in our coming to know so many Catholic workers through this process. There have been bumps in the road. You can imagine that any process that involves the interests of the institutional church, Archdiocese of New York, and the Catholic worker movement might have some bumps. The prophetic and the institutional, long our challenge. But from the beginning, there has been a wind in our sails. The spirit of Dorothy Day has been present in the cooperation of the whole church in this effort. She stands as a saint for our times, and the model she provides of peace, justice, charity, hospitality, of the centrality of the Sermon on the Mount, in finding Christ in every person, can help heal other divisions in our church, our society, and our world. One final note, when Pope Francis visited the United States, he mentioned Dorothy Day along with Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, and Thomas Merton as great Americans. And he inquired about the status of her cause. This interest of Pope Francis continues in Rome, and we have heard they are anxiously awaiting the presentation of what we have gathered in the local phase. The global Catholic worker movement, evidenced here today, can only bring greater impetus to the cause. Together we can say in the words which grace her Staten Island grave, Deo gratias. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, George, and thank you to God for the witness of Dorothy Day, certainly. Again, if you want to learn more about the process, I put the link in the chat, DorothyDayGuild.org. You could donate. You could also share any favors that you have. I think for many of us who are here today, we probably already have the, we've probably also already been sold on the importance of her legacy. And one of the things I'm most excited about as a college professor and as a Christian is to share Dorothy Day's witness with people who've never heard of her before, and to do that outside of just the United States and going beyond. And that's something I think we hope with this webinar, but with other processes and other conversations that we can do, and and to spread the good news of what people are doing inspired by her legacy. So with that, let's turn to our wonderful group of friends here gathered here. And I have 3 questions. I'll let them introduce themselves in a few minutes, and also then we'll talk about their work and their impact, how Dorothy Day has impacted them. So we have Jared Moorman from the Netherlands, from the Catholic Worker House in the Netherlands, Anne Dowling, who's coming from Australia, from the Catholic worker communities there. These are established Catholic worker communities for a bit. Then we have Noel Borador from the Nazareth House in Manila, a new community of Catholic workers that is coming to fruition there. And Noel is attached to the Episcopal Diocese of New York, so he's a missionary back in Manila, working to build Catholic worker communities. It's a really interesting conversation we could talk about. And then I'm very excited also about this new initiative that's been created in Paris, La Dorothy, and we have Henry Simeon here. So we have different generations and different communities working for a new world, or working inspired by this legacy. So let me begin with the first question for you all. Briefly describe yourself, and as you introduce yourself, when did you first hear about Dorothy Day? That's, I think, a really interesting question. How did you first hear about her, and why did she excite you? So let's start with, we'll go to the Netherlands first. So Jared, please start us off.
Okay, Kevin, thanks for the invitation. How much time do I have? How brief should I be?
We'll do a round of 3 or 4 minutes each, or 4 or 5 minutes each on this first question, and then we'll go around. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Gerard Moorman. I'm born and raised in the Netherlands. In my late teens, I was looking again at religion. Amsterdam is a very secular city, and I called myself an atheist, but in my late teens, I started looking again. And I was living in Germany at the time, and I was visiting my parents back home in Amstelveen, the suburb. And I picked up Time magazine or Newsweek, one of the two, I don't know. It was December 1980. And I was browsing through it, and I stumbled upon the obituaries. And usually I skip obituaries, but for some reason I read them, and Dorothy Day was in it. I'd never heard of her, but it sounded so interesting. A woman of faith who had shared her life with the poor for many, many years, most of her adult life, living in poverty, being arrested 7 times. And I thought to myself, that's a name I have to remember. So I thought, how do I remember her name? That was easy. Dorothy Day. And a couple of months later, I was browsing through the library in the local library, and I found the one and only book that was ever translated of Dorothy, Loaves and Fishes, translated by a Flemish woman. I've never seen that book ever since, but it was about the beginnings of the Catholic worker movement, and I was deeply impressed, and I said to myself, if ever I go to New York, I'm going to visit the Catholic worker. And in 1985, I applied for the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. It's a volunteer program for college students, basically. And they accepted me, even though I'm not American. And in fact, just after my first week of work in a soup kitchen in Brooklyn, I visited St. Joseph's House. And that was pretty much the start of my involvement with the Catholic worker. And I'm still at it 35 years later.
Great. It shows the power of the press in evangelization. It's really interesting. And just an aside, we'll have room for question and answers after this. And so if you have any questions for our panelists or just in general, there's a Q&A button at the bottom, but there's also a space for you to write any comments or introduce yourselves if you want as an attendee in the chat. So Anne, let's move over to Australia. When did you first hear about Dorothy, and how did she move you?
Well, I'm exactly like Jared. I heard about her when she died. An obituary was in our Australian newspaper. And I remember reading it and bringing it into my mum and going, I've never heard of this woman. I've been in Catholic school all my life. And she's amazing. Like, to me, she just encapsulated the Gospels as I understood them. And I found it really exciting to read about her. But then, life got busy, and it wasn't until I returned from overseas later, about 5 years later, looking for a community to live in common purse with, who lived with an open door and lived with homeless people. That was kind of what I felt God wanted me to do with my life. That I came across, people started saying to me, find the Catholic workers. So that was when I finally met a Catholic worker. So there was already a Catholic worker community that had been attempted in Brisbane. It had been going for a few years, but by the time I was looking, they'd folded. But we managed to start up again, another Catholic worker community. So, 35 years later, we're still here. Great. And I got married to a fellow Catholic worker, and we have 7 children, and some of our children are in Catholic worker communities, and now we have grandchildren growing up on a Catholic worker farm in New Zealand. So we're into the 3rd generation of Catholic workers.
That's very moving and impressive. Noel, when did you first hear about Dorothy, and how has she impacted you?
Hi, good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everybody. Thank you for having me here. I was living in New York. I lived in New York for 42 years. So maybe 30 years ago, after I finished graduate school, I didn't know what to do with my life. So I took a job as a counselor in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and I worked with a homeless agency working with homeless people with severe and persistent mental illness. And it was around that time that I started hearing Door Today, because in the Lower East Side of Manhattan are the 2 houses, right? St. Joseph's and Mary House. But I never did go in there then. But I met 2 Catholic workers who were working in my agency as counselors as well. And nothing really spectacular about them. They were very ordinary people, but I was struck by their commitment and their courage to lead out their Christian faith in community, in solidarity with the poor and the oppressed. So after my stint there, I wanted to go for further studies. So I went to California and interviewed there to get my doctoral degree, but I wasn't so sure anymore that's what I want to do after working with the homeless people. And I was really struggling with it. I remember that 30 years ago. I remember after meeting with this Dominican friar for my interview, I went to a bookstore, and the first book that popped out of the bookshelf is The Long Loneliness of Dorothy Day. And I purchased it, and I took it back to New York, and I was reading it on the plane. And that was, I think, something spoke to me that when I went to New York, I called the grad school and said, thank you very much. Thank you for your offer and your scholarship, but I'm not so sure anymore if I'm going to take it. So what happened was that I didn't take it, and I ended up in social work school, and I was a social worker for 25 years. Because I felt Dorothy really made a convincing argument that to love God, not just to study God, but to love God, you have to love your neighbor. And I thought, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. So I became a social worker, and I thought that was enough. Okay, that was it. I would love my neighbor by being a social worker, but there was this feeling that said that there's something else that is lacking, and I'm not sure what it is. But I did not get involved with the Catholic worker movement immediately, although I knew them. I had great admiration for them, but I was really scared to go inside a Catholic worker because I thought they're really crazy. They're really a bunch of crazy. I mean, crazy in a bad way, but crazy in love with Jesus, and crazy enough for me to look at these people that they're willing to give up their lives. And I said, no, that's not for me, not yet anyway. So, but God had other plans, but it took about 25 years for that to unfold.
Great. There's a clear sense that there's something new people are finding when they first hear about Dorothy, or at least those of us who are, our ears perk up because there's something new here. So Henri, tell us about you, and when did you first hear about Dorothy Day?
Yes, hello everybody. It's quite particular, I think, because in France, Dorothy Day and the Catholic workers are not so famous. So, in fact, we discovered her life in 2015 when two friends of mine, Florian and Foucault, they were based in Lyon, in the city of France called Lyon, and they read about Dorothy Day in a cafe. But this cafe, in fact, is a Christian cafe. It's called Le Simon. Le Simon has been created in the name of Simone Weil, who is a French philosopher. And so they decided to have this cafe of intellectual purpose. And in this cafe, they discovered the life of Dorothy Day. And they really realized that we need to follow her life, especially in France, in particular for the French church. I think I will go back to this topic, but we really realized that we need to follow her life, her model, in particular in France. So it was quite funny because when in 2016 we gathered all together with Foucault and Florian, so we were 15 young French Christians, and we decided to try to find the woman or the man who will inspire and embody our project, which is to create a new cafe in Paris. And we decided to choose Dorothy Day, and they were a kind of competition with other famous French model of Christianity. But we decided to choose Dorothy Day because she had a very specific life, and which is very complementary to what we used to hear in France regarding Christianity vis-a-vis also the French church. So maybe I just want to describe our project, which is the Dorothy Cafe. So this is a cafe which has been created in 2017. We first gathered in 2016, so we were 15 roughly, and we are based in the 20e arrondissement in Paris, which is a very mixed neighborhood, meaning that there is no homogeneity among the population. There's migrants. There is a strong community of associations of people committed to social activities. So we aim to be open to everybody. Everybody knows that we are Christian, and we decided to support this project through the prayers, our prayers, our faith, and this is part of it, to welcome all the people from everywhere. And it was particular this year with the COVID-19, because many places were closed for the poor, but here it was still open. And we also have a part of our activity related to manual training, because we want to offer to everybody intellectual matters, but also manual training, just to remind everybody that we are one. So Of course, we have these manual trainings open to all, but we have also conferences on politics. Like Dorothy Day, we try to explain the contemporary issues to everybody. So in a nutshell, this is what we do and how we discover Dorothy Day.
Great. And just a quick follow-up to that, Henry, who are the people who come into the cafe? Can you just describe the people?
So it's open to everybody. First of all, of course, it was mainly our network, I mean, our friends and all, but little by little, it was the neighbors. And we really want to be inside the neighborhood and not from the other part of Paris and from everywhere, because with the digital development, usually people live far from where they discuss or where they work and all. But here we just want to offer a place for the neighbors.
Great. And I think the interesting thing that you mentioned, which is certainly part of Dorothy's legacy and the legacy of Le Ceylon before that Peter Morin was involved in, was that mix of the intellectual and the manual, the worker and the intellectual. I think that's really interesting. Maybe we can come back to that. Let's circle back and ask Noel, can you describe the work that you're doing and the organizations with the Nazareth House in Manila?
Okay, so we're really tiny operation. We're so tiny that I sometimes feel we're insignificant, but that's okay, because there are, you start small, and we have a picture of Saint Teresa of Lisieux right there, big picture of her, and to talk about the little way, right? So, in any way, we are really a small house of hospitality for persons living with HIV and AIDS and are homeless. So they come to us from another shelter, and part of that is they're supposed to stay only for 6 months until we get them. Well, no, they've stayed there for the duration of the entire thing, because it's not just about, as you know, giving out charity, right? It's about forming community. And a lot of them don't have communities, don't have families who want them. So we become family. And sometimes I feel like I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, I don't know, sometimes what I am. So that's what we do. We have a small community. We have what we call Dorothy's Kitchen. It's really not a kitchen, but what we do is we cook meals, and during the pandemic, because we have a huge lockdown, we will go out and give out food to the homeless. But it's a tiny operation, but it's something. What else do we do? So basically, we also sometimes cooperate with other religious and secular organizations, especially around the issue, for me, around the issue on the war on drugs. So within the last 5 years, 35,000 people have been killed. So don't know what to do. Sorry. So I feel like it's really insignificant, but we have to say something. The other thing that we also get involved is there's a drive to reimpose the death penalty. So we were part of crafting a letter, a religious letter, an ecumenical religious letter to the Congress and to the president, saying, please don't do this. We don't need this. So those are the three things that keep me busy, keep us busy. And there's because we're a small operation, that's enough for now. I don't know where it's gonna go, but we have faith that somehow this is what we need to do right now.
Noel, you mentioned, and thank you for your work. You mentioned the people that you're serving. Many of them are your focus group, are people with HIV. Can you just spend a minute or two just describing what it's like for those men and women, those individuals in this context? Oh,
okay. So well, to compare, I chose HIV/AIDS because I used to be an HIV/AIDS social worker in New York. as well as with the homeless and severely mentally ill. So that's sort of like my forte. So, but it's one thing to be part as a social work agency, but it's another thing to live. So it's not just that we're giving them medications or we're paying for their health insurance. It's really trying to form sort of like a family where they feel like they don't have to be stigmatized. Our house is not known in the neighborhood. I don't advertise or address because there's such a stigma and prejudice. Sometimes people fear for their lives here. So it is like a family. And that actually is the model for me. And that's the reason why in so many ways we're small, because we don't want to go big that it becomes so impersonal. I think there's something about Dorothy in Dorothy's writing where I find that she really has that personal relationship with people who live in the house.
Great. Thank you, Noel. And really very interesting to hear about your work. And I was very impressed with what you said. It's not just about giving charity, it's about forming community. I think that's very insightful. So, Anne, can you share with us a bit about the work of the Catholic worker in Brisbane, Australia, broadly? You might even be able to say something about New Zealand, which I know is not the same. It's nearby, but not too close.
I know I've got a big job. There's so many different people from Australasia involved in the Catholic worker. Doing so many different things. We live on a sustainable energy farm where we make our own gas to cook with. We run our cars on straight veggie oil. We have solar energy, of course, that's sort of goes by. And but there's a hospitality house in Brisbane that's involved with dumpstering and cooking for the homeless. They do Food Not Bombs every week, the Catholic worker community there. They have refugees. A lot of refugees come through that house. In Australia, there's not a lot of support from the government for refugees until they get refugee status. So, yeah, there's a lot of those people come through the house. I like Noel talking about being like a family, because I think the big strength of Dorothy is her title, Friend of the Poor, and really that's what we are. We have had long relationships with Indigenous people, with impoverished people, for homeless people. That has carried on over the years, and I think that is the strength. They're our friends, we're their friends. We go to each other's parties. And that's the difference in the Catholic worker movement, because it's very hard to categorise us. We're not a project that's being run. We're not a social work enterprise. We don't get paid. And a lot of times people found that difficult to conceptualise exactly what we were. They were going, what is this place? And they didn't believe it was our home. We actually lived there, and they come and live with us. That's a very different concept for helping, people in crisis in the West. It probably isn't in some other countries in the East. So we're involved with climate action, coal mine. I had to write a list because there's so many different things. There's a Land Forces Expo coming up, it's a weapons expo coming up in Brisbane soon that we're involved with. Free West Papua, Right to Life, we're very involved in the pro-life movement. Free Julian Assange. We do our own thing as well. We don't just join in with other people. We do our own sorts of actions, because oftentimes when it comes to arrestable actions, there aren't a whole lot of people who want to do that. So we often have a small affinity group that does arrestable actions on mostly anti-war and anti-abortion. We've had a second Catholic worker gathering recently for Southeast Queensland. We had a problem with our local archdiocese starting to introduce guns into the cathedral during Mass. And we've been in a campaign trying to stop that happening. Extinction Rebellion, we've had some connections there. Some Catholic workers have taught nonviolence training. One of our daughters is involved with Christian peacemaking teams. I don't know if you've heard of them. She's involved with them. She's going back to Northern Iraq soon. Yeah, I think of a lot of environmental actions as well over the years that we've been involved with. We punch it well above our weight for the small number of people that we are.
And that's well put. And I think the difficulty to categorize Catholic worker communities is also extends in part the difficulty to categorize Dorothy Day, right? And people want to put her in a box or put these movements inspired by her in a box, and it's very hard to do so. Can you just speak a little bit about some of the people who are served by the direct actions of in Brisbane? I mean, who would be a target audience for your friendship at this point?
For friendships with our actions,
yeah.
with the people.
Yeah, what's the reality
well,
there?
I guess there would be a lot of people who are seeking refugee status, but there's also people with mental health crises happening that's ended in insecure accommodation. There's been single mums also in insecure accommodation situations or escaping domestic violence. Yeah, it's a variety. We don't in the Brisbane Catholic worker, we haven't ever let people stay for too long if they're using drugs or alcohol. We try, but then again, the Brisbane Catholic worker at the moment did go through a stage where they were very accommodating and trying to help people while they were trying to get off drugs, but that didn't work so well for them, for the Catholic workers themselves. And for the tenor of the house as well, and the home they were trying to create. So yeah, I think they're being a lot more astute about, if people are using, then they can't stay there. Yeah, so it generally tends to be people who are struggling with mental health or have insecure housing and needing supported accommodation.
Yeah, we think of so many people in the world that are experiencing things like that. So thank you, Anne. So to the Netherlands, what is the Catholic worker doing there, and what's going on with your effort to live out the mission there?
Well, we're a bit of an old community, I guess, about the same time as Anne's community. We started in 1988 in Amsterdam Southeast, which is sort of like a satellite city connected to Amsterdam by a metro line. But at that time, it was almost a no-go area. It was a very poor immigrant neighborhood. We're still in the neighborhood. We've had to move several times, but we're still in the same neighborhood. But it seems like it's gentrifying, to our utter amazement. We never expected that. But anyhow, we offer hospitality to non-documented migrants, refugees, men, women, children, anything. They're from all over the world, mostly from African countries at the moment. And it's long-term. People usually stay quite a long time, sometimes years, until they get some kind of chance to go on with their lives. We've been blessed the last 7-8 years that we have had a core group that's solid, 6-7 people, and around it it's a bit of a fluid thing now. That I live upstairs. I'm not part of the core group, but I literally live upstairs and help out, and I pray. There's a prayer life every day. There's common prayers, but there's people in the neighborhood now that like me, friends, neighbors that help out and are a part of the family. Our housemates, everybody, that's the one thing they say about it. This is my family. And I've come to realize how horrible it is to be in a country where nobody knows your name, nobody cares about you. And just coming into a group where you are welcome and we know them, and that is, I think that is perhaps even the most important thing of what we do, the hospitality, being brothers and sisters for each other, celebrating each other's parties. Of course, it's multi-religious. We have Muslims, so the Ramadan just ended, and we share the iftar meals once a week together, and we celebrated. I don't know what the English word is for the end of the Ramadan, suikerfeest in Dutch, but we celebrated that together, and that's really beautiful. I've always found that the most beautiful aspect, that in the Catholic worker, that it offers me as well the opportunity to become a brother or older brother or uncle now to many people that I would never ever become a brother to. And everybody spontaneously uses that word family. And well, I already mentioned the prayer life, which is it's an ecumenical community. There's let me see, few Catholics nowadays, but many Protestants in the community. We're very involved with the fight, the struggle against the new generation of nuclear weapons being introduced in the Netherlands and Germany as well. There's a lot of contact with the German groups. Brood und Rosen in Hamburg is a community very similar to ours. And there's many contacts. And apart from that, it's a bit like some of us are very involved with Christian Climate Action, the Christian branch of Extinction Rebellion. There's actually a new group that started last August, sort of like a sister community of 5 young people who left the Jeanette Noel house and started the Dorothy community. Fortunately, nearby, it's about 12 kilometers. We do everything on bike. We don't have a car. It's more of a rural community. They're starting up, and but it's Dorothy because of Dorothy Day also, but they also chose Dorothy Stang, this Notre Dame sister who was killed in Brazil for solidarity and activism with the rural farmers. So I just before joining this conversation, I looked at the Dorothy Day, the CatholicWorker.org website to see what's on all the groups that are springing up, and there's many that are not yet on the list. That's another sign, I think, of the strength of the Catholic worker and the strength of the example of Dorothy. She's capturing hearts and minds, and there's friends of ours who are very inspired by this kind of life and want to do the same thing. And they're not on the list, but they're very much inspired by. So it's a great joy to see how things are expanding. I'd never expected this, not even 15 years ago. That we translated Jim Forrest's biography of Dorothy Day, All Is Grace, into Dutch last year. It got really a lot of good reviews. It's a lot of work to translate the book, but it was worth it. It got so much attention, and Henry, Dorothy was not at all. Nobody knew about her when we started in '88, and it's slowly but surely people are getting to know her. I think she definitely has something to say in Europe as well.
That's great. Yeah. And so we have about, I think probably 20 more minutes, and I want to make sure that people, if they have any questions, can put them in the Q&A feature, attendees. And I know that some of the attendees, maybe they've not heard of Dorothy Day before or not so well, and others have known quite a lot. Jared, you mentioned something very interesting, which I hope we can follow up with maybe another conversation. Some of these younger communities of people return, especially who are attracted by the ecological justice elements of the Catholic worker tradition and this vision of farming communes, and that's something we can maybe tap into at some point, that energy there. But want to maybe give it to you all to see, or Colleen or others too, or George, are there any other questions that you had about each other, or comments on the sharings that others have shared? Is there anything that strikes you so far? That any observations or interesting? Open up to conversation between our panel. Anne, please.
I just wanted to say, I think for me too, it's important that I had a place to belong as a pacifist Catholic in the church, that Dorothy paved the way for that for me, and gave me a group, gave me a theology and the practices around that. So that's also been her gift.
The famous quote that the Catholic worker is the farthest to the left that you can get while still being in the church, or I forget who. It was a famous quote that someone said at one point. Yeah, others, yeah.
I think it was Michael Harrington who said that.
Yeah.
Just a thing, I saw that there was a question in the question and answers it's been there for almost since the beginning. It's an interesting question, and
can you read it for us?
Yeah, it's by Jeffrey Corrigan. What elements of your own cultures have you found to be particularly resonant with Dorothy's message and the Catholic worker movement? It's a challenging question, but I think for me the answer is quite clear. It's the radical hospitality and solidarity. It's the thing like people are really touched that we live, that we share life with people that are so down and out and have nothing, and that's something that impresses them and makes them curious about the rest. And Holland is a very secular country. But it's very, very often people would put you aside if they find that you're Christian. It's not a thing that will make you popular, but people are intrigued by this combination of radical activism, radical solidarity, and faith. And it's especially this radical solidarity, sharing life, sharing everything. Well, not everything, but a lot that impresses them and makes them open for the whole message, actually.
Yeah, Henry, yeah, please.
It's the question is very interesting because it's especially what I wanted to talk about the fact that Dorothy Day is particular for us because her life is very accurate for our times. I mean, for the French Church. I just have three or four points, but which are very specific to the French Church, because in France we have the principle of laïcité, but sometimes it is not very well interpreted. Sometimes people think that laïcité means you need to fight any religion, and everyone should not show her or his face. And especially, it's really the case for the social activists. Sometimes they are scared of showing their face. They think that people will say, yes, you are not open. You will just help the Christian because you are a Christian. And so I don't know from where it stands, but it's like that in France. Maybe it's the influence of the past, of course, of the communism, but we have a lot of examples of Christian foundations which decided not to show their Christian part, and it was the beginning of our thinking with our team. That we really need in France to show that you can articulate your faith with your social and political views, your actions. And on the contrary, on the opposite, it helps you to make lasting foundation, lasting actions. And without praying, without the help of Jesus, you cannot do lasting action. And this is this very precise point which push us to choose Dorothy Day. There is also the fear of communitarism, in France. When you speak about community, people think that you are a close community, you will only focus on your community, and you are competing with the national community. And so you are a source of division. And again, Dorothy Day showed that it's the opposite. I mean, when you assume your faith, when you have a strong community, but an open one, you can do greater things, and you can fuel the national community. So again, it was a particular pillar for us. There is also the role of the states in France. In France, the state plays a central role in the social sphere. And Dorothy Day is a woman who choose not to ask for for subsidies, for all this stuff. So we decided to do the same, and to show that we can do social things without the support of the state. And sometimes you need to be independent from the state to express or convey a particular political message or social messages. So it was important for us. And the last point is about the current crisis within the church, of course, the abuses, the sexual and power abuses that we discover. So people in France need to see that you have a diverse church. I mean, you don't have only clergymen, and of course they are central, but we can do things without the parishes. And we try with the Dorothy Cafe to be somehow a parish outside of the church, or a parish in the margin, like Pope Francis asked us to do, to go in the margin, in the periphery of the society. So all these points push us to go towards the life of Dorothy, and to choose her as a source of inspiration.
Wow, that's great. Noel or Colleen or George, I think. Any response? Noel? Yeah.
Yeah, I just like to say.
Dorothy,
sorry, Noel first, and then George. Sorry, yeah, Noel.
Dorothy Day quoted John of the Cross, where there is no love, put love, and you will draw love. Right. That's one of her favorite quotes that I also carry with me. I mean, somebody just said that the Philippines is a semi-failed state because we could not meet the needs of the people here. We're a third world country. There's vast inequity. We don't even have the same things that's happening in the United States in terms of the vaccine, things like that. One thing that resonated me about Dorothy Day was saying, well, you know, anarchism. Okay, good if you have the state, but don't rely on the state to do that. You have to begin personally doing something, even so small. So I think that resonates in our culture, because with all the pandemic going on, with the failed economy here, people right now are doing things on our own to take care of each other. The sense of community, the sense of solidarity. I think that resonates very well with Dorothy today. Okay, so let's take care of each other. Let's not wait for somebody, for Peter Morin saying, let's not wait for the welfare state to take care of us. Obviously, we would need the government, but if we don't have it, then we need personally to reach out to one another. And I think Gerard talked about the vast solidarity among us.
Great. George.
Just quickly, Kevin, I have to say, I'm feeling wonderful hope here this morning. You know, it looks pretty dismal out there in so many ways, with the sin of racism and militarism and the pandemic, the incredible poverty and war. And all of a sudden, a light has gone on this morning, and I'm very grateful for the hope that I feel from this conversation against incredible odds. So thank you. I just wanted to say, Jerry used a phrase, and he said, becoming brother and sister to people that I never thought I would be. And that hit me with great power, because I think Dorothy Day, like Francis, is asking us to cross boundaries, cross barriers, as people are crossing boundaries and barriers to us. And to me, that sense that we can meet each other and meet, again, Christ in each one of us from the Christian perspective, I'm very grateful and very moved by that. So again, thank you.
Great. Before we get to some of the questions, Colleen, is there anything that jumped out at you so far?
I just wanted to go a little bit deeper on one thing, which is Henry was talking about how the Dorothy Cafe has, you know, kind of an intellectual mission. And I was wondering, when you're having these conversations with people, when you're, you know, having these discussions that the cafe is meant to foster, what are the things about Dorothy that tend to really resonate with the people that are at the cafe?
So in fact, we propose each week a conference, but we try to find a new angle, a new point of view for each topic. Sometimes we choose a topic such as agricultural topics, which are sometimes less discussed in France. Sometimes we wanted to discuss about death, because we know that this topic is very well neglected, because everybody will die, but nobody wants to speak about it. All this kind of discussions. We also discuss about international crisis. I am a diplomat, so I try to share my competence, my skills for this cafe, and we communicate on these conferences. But obviously, since we welcome everybody, and also mental ill people, also undocumented people, refugees, like you, we explain to them what will happen on Thursday, because this is the day of the conference, and invite them to be part of it. So sometimes it's a conference presented by a specialist, but we really like to ask members of the team to also make their own presentation to be accessible. And just to mention, in our project, I mean, we are a team of members, volunteers, who decided to move to live just near the cafe. So it's not just a social, association or commitment like that. It's an extreme decision, because you really focus your life on this commitment. And many of us decide to walk around the neighborhood of the cafe. So it's really an extreme way of being committed.
Great. So we have three new great questions from our participants, and maybe we'll take these three, and that should cover a lot of it. And whoever wants to answer can answer. So one is from Tony Pitchler, who talks about that he is an associate. They're an associate with a religious community whose charism is inclusivity. Knowing the Catholic worker is not a religious community per se, what would you say is the charism of the Catholic worker movement? And maybe for Jared or Anne, who've been around for a while with the workers, I don't know, I'm sure you've had debates about this, but what would you say is the charism of the worker movement?
Shall I start, Anne?
Yeah, please, yeah.
I find it a bit difficult to say, but for me, the unique thing about the Catholic worker is the combination of faith, radical direct action, poverty, and sharing your life with others. I've never found that anywhere. There's many similar movements, which I love. The Emmaus movement, I was involved, Abbé Pierre's movement, but I've never found this particular combination of strong. And even though there's the disadvantage is that we don't do anything really well. We pray, but it's a struggle to pray well because there's so many. And we're very much part of the church, which I think has been redeeming grace. We get so much support from the church. We get a lot of support from religious communities. We feel very close to the Benedictines, nearby Benedictine community. And I admire the solidity of many religious orders. But I think there's a wonderful relationship of support and prayer, and they support us. We get so much support from religious communities, and I think they're really inspired by what we do. So, and there's a lot of contact. It's a long answer. I hope I hope it's a bit of an answer to the question. And I'll give you.
I suppose it's the attempt to have faith in action, to live your faith in an active way. And I think what Jared said about poverty, living simply, it is pretty radical in the West. I mean, we certainly, we look poor in the West, but we're not poor on a global scale. And we like to keep that perspective for ourselves and for our children as well, who can feel like they're, that they suffered because we were not as well, equipped as people around us. But so I think it is the living simply and being a friend to the poor, that a live-in friend as well, that we actually share our lives with them, is something very different.
Marianne Donahue Lynch, who works with the De La Salle brothers in the United States, reminds us that it's also a feast day of Jean-Baptiste de La Salle, who obviously was an impact on Dorothy's understanding through Peter Morin and through her connection with the various LaSallian communities in and around New York. But maybe I'll read these last two questions, these other two questions here, and have you all respond, and Colleen too. if you want. And so so this is a question from Nikos Kosmodilas, who has a beautiful icon, by the way, of Dorothy Day. You could search his name, and he's a young activist in Greece, Greek Orthodox, who has made a beautiful icon of Saint Dorothy. So Saint Dorothy cultivated a radical view of issues of injustice with a traditional understanding of respect for human life. Do people in your context find it challenging to accept both sides of this in your ministry without choosing one or the other? And I think hinted at the fact that at least in Australia, there's a strong commitment to the pro-life and anti-war, and crossing these often binaries of conservative liberal, which we know don't always fit in Dorothy's life. So that's one question. The other question relates to about uniting the Catholic worker movement internationally and the challenges around that, or the interesting question about connecting the workers beyond just the local community. So maybe we'll have those as our last sort of go around if anyone wants to feels called to respond to one of those questions. Noel, you were shaking your head at one of them. Do you have a response to either of those?
The first one is about life, right? Saint Irenaeus says that the glory of God, Gloria Dei, is a human person fully alive, not just in terms of physical, although that's the underlying thing, but all around in terms of the economic, the social-political part of that person. So I think Bernardino had that seamless thing, right? Garment of life, right? That they're all connected, right? So why do you have to choose between both? I think we want life in its fullness, as Jesus says. I came here so that you may have life in its fullness, physically and
Fun fact, Cardinal Bernardine took the idea of the seamless garment from Eileen Egan, who was a member of the New York Catholic Worker. So that idea in many ways stems out of the Catholic Worker and the Dorothy Day tradition. Yeah, other responses to one of those questions about the challenge of bridging those different aspects of life. I think Noel gave a great answer to that, or of the challenge of organizing an anarchist movement.
Well, I'd just like to say it's been very useful being the bridge between those two groups, you know, the anti-war and the pro-life, and being on both sides and seeing how both sides operate, and just being a voice for the other in the other camp. That has been a real gift of the Catholic worker movement in Australia, that we've been able to be that voice. Otherwise, I think they can just write off that side. The other side, they never meet anybody. Often the anti-war people never meet a pro-lifer, and the pro-lifers never meet an anti-war. But I've marched beside Vietnam vets in March for the Babies and had conversations about it, and because we're actually very strong on both, that's also useful because we have respect from both sides.
So yeah, that's great. So in our 2 or 3 minutes left, other responses. Henry, yeah, please.
Yes, just to explain again the peculiar situation in France, I think politically, French society, as well as the community of the French Christians, they are divided roughly into two, and the pro-life somehow they are from the bourgeoisie a little bit, and it's difficult for them to be connected to the poor, to the fight against the poverty and all these matters. While in the left, you have the Christian very committed to fight against poverty, but they have less. Less motivation to fight for life, for the respect of human life from the beginning until the end. So again, like Anne, I would say that we try to put this bridge between the two, because again, we are one, and it's as Noel said, it's connected. I mean, obviously. So, but it will take time, and we are in a left, so to say, a neighborhood. So, first of all, we are trying to show that we are a Christian, not from the bourgeoisie style, and we try to be among the poor. And then we will try to show that, yes, you can see from another point of view this question of respect of life.
Great. Colleen, do you have any thoughts on some of these things?
Yeah, I mean, I just have to say, like, first of all, I'm bowled over and like so admire and feel so much of the hope that George mentioned just by hearing all the things that you're all involved in. You know, my experience as a Catholic worker has only been in the United States, and so to see the way that you're facing some of the same challenges and trying to overcome some of the same challenges too is really good. I also wanted to like say briefly, I appreciate being able to see this morning all of the different ways that people can take Dorothy's message, Dorothy's lesson, Dorothy's witness, and run with it. You know, there's no one way to be a Catholic worker. There's also no one way to, you know, try to follow Dorothy's example, right? Like in my own life as a journalist, I try to, you know, find different ways that I can, try to, I guess, follow her example in some ways in journalism, right? Which is completely outside the Catholic worker world. So it's just been really, really interesting and enlightening to hear what you've all had to say. I guess on this latter question on uniting an anarchist movement, I don't know, I'd be interested to know what you all think, because from my reading of Dorothy, you know, it kind of seems like she might just prefer for each community to do its own thing and not try to build a big overarching like cause together. You know, she seems to be a lot more focused on the local, the personal, and sort of has an allergy to any, I guess, lack of subsidiarity, right? Why do it on a higher level when you could do it on a more grassroots level? So yeah, I'd be curious, you know, for y'all who are actually working in the movement and related areas, what do you think?
Yeah, Jared, please.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question. How do you get a group of pretty anarchistically inclined people to organize something together? It does not happen on institutional level, but there's strong ties between communities. And where I see it does get together is in the fight against nuclear arms. In Europe, it's interesting that for many years in Germany, at the site of the nuclear bombs in Büchel, there's been Americans coming out of a sort of sense of these are our arms. This is our government placing them here. And there's the Germans and the Dutch. It's interesting that we've gotten together around this issue and done these actions together now for several years. And again, there's going to be another action later this year in Büchel. And finally, we're getting some of us have gotten really stiff prison sentences. Some of us in the community, so we have to figure out who's going first, that the whole community doesn't collapse when too many end up in prison at the same time. But that's an action where internationally we get together in a very grassrootsy way.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I think that's obviously a long struggle here. We're going to close in just a second, but I wanted to give the words, give space for a minute or two if any of our panelists have any last insights or last words. Henry, please.
Just to say that we have translated the autobiography of Dorothy Day 2 years ago, I guess. And we also wrote a biography of her, which was edited in 2018. So we are trying to make her more famous in France, because, as I told you, it's not the case. And I mean, some national newspapers also wrote more and more about this her life, thanks to these books, but also thanks to the mediatization of our actions in the cafe. So thanks, Colin, to show this book. Thanks a lot.
That's great. Yeah, wonderful. Others for last words. Noel or? Well, I think, Noel, any last words before we wrap up? No. Okay. Well, I think so. I think as we close, I think we have to really remember all the people that are in serious crisis right now in our communities in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis and the economic fallout. We think especially about the people, the men, women, children in Israel and Palestine at the moment, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in all the places where people are in need of the works of mercy. And I think today we saw, at least I saw, some examples of the works of mercy in action. And there are many more things like that. There's a lot of good news coming up in the church. And maybe as a way to end, I just want to draw a quote. I'll put it in the chat. And this is a quote from Pope Francis's exhortation, Gaudete in Exsultate. And here on number 63, he says, and when I read this, I thought of Dorothy Day. There can be any number of theories about what constitutes holiness, with various explanations and distinctions. Such reflection may be useful, but nothing is more enlightening than turning to Jesus's words and seeing his way of teaching the truth. Jesus explained with great simplicity what it means to be holy when he gave us the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes are like a Christian's identity card. So if anyone asks what we must do to be a good Christian, the answer is clear. We have to do each in our own way what Jesus told us in the Sermon on the Mount. In the Beatitudes, we find a portrait of the Master, which we are called to reflect in our daily lives. And I know that many of us resonate with this challenge for us. So thank you all to our panel who are living this identity card, the Beatitudes identity card, and we will be in touch. And please go to dorothyDayGuild.org for more information on the work of the Guild and how you can support our efforts going forward. Thank you all and have a good afternoon, evening, and good night, Anne and others, as you go to sleep. Thank